What if a map created nearly a century ago could still determine where investment flows today? What if the neighborhoods most associated with poverty, crime, vacant lots, and disinvestment weren't accidents of history at all? What if they were the predictable result of policies intentionally designed to separate communities from capital? To understand modern Chicago, we first have to understand redlining. Because before there was urban renewal, before there were TIF districts, before there were violence prevention grants and redevelopment programs, there were maps. And those maps changed everything. The year was 1935. America was in the middle of the Great Depression. The federal government created programs intended to stabilize the housing market and expand home ownership. One of those programs involved evaluating neighborhoods for mortgage lending risk. The agency responsible was the Homeowners Loan Corporation, or HOLC. Cities across the country were surveyed and mapped. Chicago was one of them. Neighborhoods were graded. Green neighborhoods were considered the safest investments. Blue neighborhoods were still desirable. Yellow neighborhoods were considered declining. And red neighborhoods were considered hazardous. Hence the term redlining. On paper, the maps were presented as tools for assessing financial risk. In practice, race played a major role. Neighborhoods with black residents were routinely labeled high risk, regardless of income levels or economic activity. Many black neighborhoods in Chicago were outlined in red, and once they were redlined, access to capital became increasingly restricted. Mortgage lending declined, investment declined, property improvement became difficult, business development slowed, generational wealth creation was disrupted, not because residents lacked ambition, but because capital was systematically withheld. Think about what happens when a neighborhood can't access investment for decades. Homes deteriorate. Businesses struggle, property values stagnate, infrastructure ages, economic opportunities disappear. The neighborhood begins to decline, and eventually people point to that decline as evidence that the neighborhood was a bad investment. But did it fail, or was it prevented from succeeding? Chicago provides one of the clearest examples. Areas such as Bronzeville, North Lawndale, Englewood, and Washington Park experienced decades of restricted access. Meanwhile, neighborhoods that received favorable lending classifications accumulated wealth through homeownership, business growth, and investment. The difference wasn't simply individual effort. The difference was access to capital, and capital determines opportunity. The consequences extended beyond housing. Schools rely on property values. Commercial districts depend on investment. Infrastructure follows development. Over time, entire communities became trapped in a cycle where disinvestment created deterioration, and deterioration justified further disinvestment. What began as a lending decision became a self-fulfilling prophecy. By the late 20th century, many redline neighborhoods were described as blighted. But here's the uncomfortable reality. The blight came after the red lines, not before them. The conditions emerged after decades of restricted investment. Today, redlining is illegal, but its effects remain visible in poverty rates, home values, vacant properties, and health outcomes. The lines may have disappeared from official maps, but their imprint remains on the landscape and in modern development policy. Understanding redlining changes how we think about poverty. It forces us to ask whether struggling neighborhoods are suffering because of choices or denial of access. In our next episode, we'll examine what happened when policymakers attempted to fix these neighborhoods with a policy known as urban renewal. Supporters called it progress. Critics called it Negro removal. And its impact on Chicago can still be seen today. This is the Business of Blight,